Witness the exact moment Donald Trump used a single folder to completely dismantle Gavin Newsom's 2028 presidential dreams in front of the entire nation. Gavin Newsom called Trump an invasive species in front of 40 cameras. He was the #1 Democratic frontrunner for 2028, the governor of the fifth largest economy on earth, the man the Democratic Party had bet its future on. 30 days after the hearing, he dropped from first to third in primary polling. His chief of staff began cooperating with the DOJ. California was placed under federal FR/UD investigation, and the sentence that every 2028 rival Whitmer, Shapiro, Buttigieg now only needed 6 words to end any debate: "You can't run California." Smash that like button because you are about to witness what happens when the most polished governor in America meets the quietest version of Donald Trump, and the quiet destroys more than the shouting ever did. Mr. President, you are a convicted F***lon presiding over an administration that has violated more court orders in 18 months than any presidency in history. You are tearing down the East Wing of the White House to build a ballroom. You are an piece of bushes in American democracy. Bushy no bushidana bushidawada bushid be datis. Bushid's the day he decided to run for president, which was by most estimates the day he was born. The hearing, a joint session on federal oversight of state fraud and mismanagement, had been called after Trump's Truth Social declaration that a fraud investigation of California has begun. Every network carried it live. The gallery was full. The press section was standing room only because the political press understood what was happening. The 2028 Democratic frontrunner was sitting across from the man he would have to beat, and the audition had begun. Newsom was good at this. He had always been good at this. The hair, the suit, the voice, the modulated California baritone that sounded like a podcast host who had been elected governor. He had spent 7 years as the anti-Trump polished, where Trump was rough, calm, where Trump was loud, institutional, where Trump was chaotic. The contrast was his brand. The contrast was his candidacy. The contrast was in many ways the entire argument for his presidency. California is the 5th largest economy on earth. We have 40 million people. We lead the world in technology, agriculture, entertainment, and renewable energy. And I will not sit here and be lectured about governance by a man who bankrupted casinos. The gallery split. The Democratic side produced the sound. Newsom's staff, positioned in the second row, exchanged the look that staff exchange when the principal has landed the line, they wrote. The man describing California as the 5th largest economy on earth had presided over the largest unemployment fraud in American history. $31 billion paid to C.R. Minnels, prisoners on D-Times Ath Row, and organized crime syndicates from Russia, China, and Romania, and his chief of staff was under federal indictment for claiming a $15,000 Chanel bag as a business expense. President Donald J. Trump sat at the podium. He had been quiet during Newsom's opening statement. Not fidgeting quiet, not phone-checking quiet. Still quiet. The quiet of a man who has decided to let the other person talk first because the talking will make what comes next more effective. He smiled the private smile, the one from the Omar hearing. "Governor, beautiful speech, really beautiful. You should see the economy you rerunning, though." He opened the folder, gold tab. "Let's start with $31 billion. In 2020 and 2021, California's Employment Development Department, the agency responsible for processing unemployment claims under your administration, paid out an estimated $31 billion in fraudulent claims. $31 billion. That is the largest unemployment fraud in the history of the United States." He read the number the way he read all devastating numbers, slowly, with the patience of a man who understands that large numbers need time to be felt, not just heard. "I'm a businessman, Governor. I've made a lot of money, more than most people can imagine. But I've never lost $31 billion. Nobody has. That's not a scandal. That's a record. You hold the record for the largest FR/UD loss in the history of the American government. Congratulations." Newsom's jaw tightened. The governor's jaw, the press conference jaw, the jaw that had been set in the position of composed authority since he took office in 2019. The tightening was minimal, professional, the jaw of a man who has been in rooms like this before and knows that jaw control is the first discipline of public performance. But the tightening was there, captured by the C-SPAN camera positioned at podium level, visible on any screen larger than a phone. $1 billion of that $31 billion went to prisoners. People who were in jail in your state, under your supervision, receiving unemployment checks, including Governor, and I want to make sure the committee hears this, including Scott Peterson, death row, convicted of mistreating his pregnant wife. Scott Peterson received unemployment benefits from your state. The room made a sound, not laughter, not gasps. The sound a room makes when a fact is specific enough to be obscene. Newsom's hands, the polished hands, the rehearsed hands, the hands that gestured with the practiced fluidity of a man who had spent 30 years in California politics learning that hands are content, shifted on the table. The right hand moved to cover the left, not dramatically, the slow interlocking of fingers that signals the beginning of a body's retreat into self-protection. A rapper from Memphis named Fontrell Antonio Baines, stage name Nuke Bizzle, made a music video bragging about scamming your EDD program. The video is on YouTube. It's called EDD. He filmed himself with stacks of cash from your state's unemployment program and put it on the internet. And nobody in your administration noticed until federal investigators found it. Laughter. The particular Trump room laughter. Not the laughter of a joke, but the laughter of an absurdity that has been documented and presented as fact. Crime syndicates from Russia, China, Romania were filing claims from overseas. From overseas, Governor. People who have never set foot in California, who have never worked a single day in the United States, were collecting unemployment checks from your state because your agency, under your governor, waived basic FR times UD prevention requirements. He pulled a document. The United States Senate Committee on Finance determined that your Labor Secretary, Julie Su, whom President Biden later made acting Secretary of Labor, waived basic fact-checking and FR times UD prevention requirements for unemployment insurance, contradicting Department of Labor guidance. She didn't follow the rules. She waived them. Your administration waived the rules that were designed to prevent exactly what happened. Newsom leaned toward his microphone. Mr. President, the EDD situation was a national. Trump did not pause, did not acknowledge, continued at the same volume, the same cadence, the presidential cadence that was not natural to him, and was therefore more unsettling than his natural cadence. The way a loud man being quiet is more alarming than a loud man being loud. Haywood Talcove, CEO of LexisNexis Risk Solutions, one of America's leading fraud specialists, said, and I'm quoting, "I was begging federal officials not to let the money go out like that because it was going to be the biggest fraud in the history of our country." He said that before it happened. He warned you. He warned everyone, and your state waived the rules anyway. Newsom's sentence. The EDD situation was a national, hung in the air unfinished. The way sentences hang when they have been interrupted, not by a louder voice, but by a voice that simply did not stop. The sentence had been traveling toward national problem that affected every state, and had been denied its destination. Newsom's mouth closed around the unfinished sentence the way a hand closes around a coin it has dropped too late, already falling. His lips pressed together not in anger but in the recalculation of a man who has been interrupted and must decide whether to attempt the sentence again or abandon it. He abandoned it. The abandonment was visible, a micro-exhale through the nose, the release of air that had been gathered for words that would not be spoken. And here's what makes it worse, Governor. If $31 billion in fraud can get worse. Your EDD also had a former employee, Phyllis Hopestitt, who was personally responsible for determining whether claimants were eligible for benefits during the pandemic. Her job was to stop fraud. In January 2026, she pleaded guilty to defrauding the very program she was supposed to protect. She stole $750,000. The person you hired to catch the fraud was the fraud. And in the same month, because in California, Governor, the scandals come in pairs. A former Madera County benefits eligibility worker named Letitia Mariscal was charged with embezzling $40,000 in food stamp benefits. Food stamps, Governor, not from criminals overseas, from the people in your state whose job it was to hand out food stamps to the hungry." He pulled a printed quote. California Assemblyman David Tangipa said, "And I want the committee to hear this because this is not a Republican talking point. This is a California state legislature. Sacramento is pervaded by a culture of C-times-ruption." And he points the finger right to the top. "That's the top, Governor. That's you." Newsom's neck, the neck that had supported the polished angle of the governor's chin for 3 decades of public life, changed temperature. The flush was subtle, not the bright flush of embarrassment, the slow warming that arrives when blood pressure rises and the capillaries near the surface of skin that is not protected by television makeup. The neck, the area above the collar, the strip of skin between the shirt and the jaw, dilate in response to a stress signal the conscious mind has not yet acknowledged. The flush was visible only on the high-definition C-SPAN feed, and only to viewers watching on screens large enough to register a 1-shade change in skin tone. But on those screens, and there were 20 million of them, the change read as something is happening inside the governor's body that the governor's face does not want you to see. Governor, while $31 billion was going to prisoners and criminals and rappers making music videos about scamming your state, real Californians, waitresses, bus drivers, teachers who lost their jobs in your lockdowns, were on hold with your EDD for weeks, months. Phones jammed, tech glitches, account freezes. Some of them were on the verge of suicide. Lawmakers told the press they were fielding calls from constituents who were desperate, and your agency was paying Scott Peterson. He set the document down. $31 billion. Governor. That's more than the GDP of Vermont, more than the GDP of Iceland. You lost more money to FRUD in one program than the entire economic output of several countries. I've done a lot of deals, and I've never seen anyone lose that much money without going to prison. But in California, under your leadership, the people who lost the money get promotions, and the people who St. Times Lee the money get music videos. He turned a page. But that's just the money you lost to CR Times Minals. Let's talk about the money you lost to yourself, the 6th of November 2020. He said the date, the way he said all dates that mattered, with the precision of a man who has been waiting to say it. While you were ordering 40 million Californians to cancel Thanksgiving under penalty of law, you were sitting at the French Laundry restaurant in Napa Valley, 12 people, $350 per person. No masks, no social distancing, indoor dining. He pulled a photograph, held it up. The room could see it on the hearing room screens. Newsom shoulder to shoulder with guests, no masks, indoor. The sliding glass doors to the courtyard closed. Your office told the press the dinner was outdoor. This photograph, obtained by KTTV Los Angeles, shows it was indoor. The doors were closed because, according to a witness, the party was making too much noise. So not only were you violating your own rules, Governor, you were violating them loudly. Laughter, sustained. The room had found the rhythm that Trump creates. The rhythm where facts are presented as comedy and comedy is presented as evidence. And the audience cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. Newsom attempted the smile. The Newsom smile, the polished, camera-ready, debate stage smile that had survived every press conference, every recall attempt, every confrontation in 7 years of governing the most scrutinized state in America. The smile was his oldest weapon. It communicated control, composure, the particular California confidence that says, "I am above this." The smile encountered laughter, laughter directed at him, and the smile against laughter combination produced something the cameras had never captured on Gavin Newsom's face before, a micro-expression that read as neither smile nor grimace, but as the transitional state between the two, and sever Haverden spouks, a Meandred instructed to project amusement, and whose nervous system is simultaneously processing humiliation, and the two instructions are competing for control of the same facial architecture. The micro-expression lasted less than a second, but C-SPAN captured it in high definition. And the frame, Newsom's face caught between smile and grimace while the room laughs, would become the defining image of the hearing. You didn't just break your own rules, Governor. You enforced rules on 40 million people, rules that carried penalties, rules that shut down businesses, rules that kept families apart on Thanksgiving. And then you broke them yourself. at a restaurant that charges more per meal than most of your constituents make in a day. I never told anyone to cancel Thanksgiving. Governor, you did. And then you had dinner. Trump paused, let the line sit, then continued, not with comedy, with something harder. You were sitting next to Dustin Corcoran, the CEO of the California Medical Association, the man whose organization was advising your government on COVID restrictions, the man whose advice was cancel Thanksgiving, and he was at the dinner. The doctor telling the patients to stay home was eating at the French Laundry with the governor who ordered them to, and next to him was the CMA's lobbyist, Janice Norman. So the governor, the CEO of the Medical Association, and the lobbyist, the three people most responsible for the rules that were keeping 40 million Californians locked in their homes, were sitting shoulder to shoulder, indoor, no masks, at a restaurant that costs $350 before wine. You know who wasn't at the French Laundry that night, Governor? Maria from Fresno. She was at home alone because you told her to be, and she listened because she trusted her governor. Newsom's right hand moved to his water glass, lifted it, drank, set it down. The action was controlled, deliberate, measured. The action of a man who is performing the act of drinking water to give his body something to do that is not responding to what is being said. But the drinking was itself a tell. A man who is comfortable does not need to drink at minute 22. A man who needs water at minute 22 is a man whose mouth has gone dry. The Sacramento Bee, not a Republican newspaper, Governor. The Sacramento Bee, your state's paper of record, called it haute cuisine hypocrisy. They said, and I love this quote, "It's beautiful. Nothing will launder the stain of stupidity from his reputation after this ill-conceived outing." That's not me saying that. That's the bee, your bee, stinging you. And that was 4 years ago. Since then, you've added a few more courses to the menu. Newsom's smile was gone, abandoned. What remained was the governor's neutral face, and neutral on a man whose brand was polish and charm, read as absence. The charm had left the building. The face that remained was competent, composed, and entirely empty. The face of a politician whose signature expression has been removed and who has not yet found a replacement. In 2023, you signed legislation raising the minimum wage for fast food workers to $20 an hour. $20. You said it was about fairness, about dignity, about making sure the people who flip burgers and mop floors can afford to live in your state. But the bill had an exemption for restaurants that, and I'm quoting the legislative language, produce for sale bread as a standalone menu item. He looked at Newsom. That exemption was for Panera Bread. And the largest Panera Bread franchisee in America is a man named Greg Flynn. Greg Flynn has donated at least $164,800 to your political campaigns. Greg Flynn also acquired a Napa Valley resort that was managed by your hospitality firm. Greg Flynn is your donor, your business partner, and your friend. You crafted a minimum wage exemption in secret at the governor's office level without the involvement of the bill's own author for your friend. Your workers got $20 an hour. Your friend's workers didn't. When asked about it, you said it was, and I'm quoting, part of the sausage making. Newsom's left hand moved to the table edge and gripped it, not the polished grip. The grip of a hand that has received information from the body that the body needs an anchor, the knuckles whitened by a shade. The grip was brief, 2 seconds before the hand released and returned to the interlocked position. But the 2 seconds of grip told the room that the body beneath the governor's suit was no longer operating on polish. It was operating on adrenaline. But Panera is just the appetizer, Governor. Let's talk about the main course. Dana Williamson, your chief of staff, the person who sat outside your office every day, who managed your schedule, who ran your government. In November 2025, a federal grand jury indicted Dana Williamson for public corruption. The indictment alleges that she and 4 co-conspirators funneled $225,000 from a dormant campaign account. She is also accused of falsely claiming more than $1.7 million in fraudulent business expenses on her taxes. He read from the indictment summary, slowly, item by item. A $15,000 Chanel bag, listed as a business expense, laughter, a chartered private jet, business expense, more laughter. A $170,000 birthday trip to Mexico, business expense. The laughter was sustained now. Each item was a punchline. Each punchline was a federal charge. The comedy and the criminality were the same thing, and she falsified documents to obtain pandemic relief funds for her own business. Governor, your chief of staff stole pandemic money, the same pandemic money your state lost $31 billion of. She stole from the money that was already being spent. He set the indictment down. When Williamson left your office, you said, and I'm quoting, "I will miss her insight, tenacity, and big heart." Pause. Governor, you missed more than her big heart. You missed her big expense reports. The laughter was the loudest of the hearing. It came from both sides, not because Democrats found it funny, but because the line was constructed in the particular way that makes laughter involuntary, the way a reflex is involuntary, and the room produced it before the political calculation could prevent it. Newsom did not attempt the smile. The smile had been retired 2 chapters ago. His face held in the neutral position, the position of a man who is absorbing damage without displaying it, the political equivalent of a boxer who has decided to cover up and wait for the bell. But covering up is not winning, and the cameras, which had been trained on his face since the hearing began, were documenting not a governor, but a man who had stopped performing and was now simply enduring. Trump's voice changed, dropped, the showman receded. What remained was something the room had rarely seen: Trump being serious without being angry. Serious the way a man is serious when he is about to say the thing he came to say. Governor, I want to talk about homeless people. He pulled a State Auditor's report. In 2024, the California State Auditor reported that your administration spent $24 billion on programs to alleviate homelessness. $24 billion. And the auditor found that your administration had not adequately tracked whether the money was spent effectively. Not whether it was St. Times Len, whether it worked. You spent $24 billion, and you can tell the people of California what they got for it. During the period you spent that $24 billion, the homeless population in California increased. You spent more money on homelessness than any state in American history, and there are more homeless people. When you ran for governor, you promised to build 3.5 million homes by 2025. You called it your housing plan, the signature promise of your campaign. Actual homes built through 2025, 640,000. When asked about it, you called it a stretch goal. He paused, the pause of a man loading a weapon. Stretch goal. Governor, in New York, when a contractor promises to build 3.5 million and delivers 640,000, we don't call that a stretch goal. We call that a breach of contract. Actually, we call it fraud. But I'm being nice today. 7 state agencies are now officially labeled high risk for waste, fraud, abuse, or severe mismanagement under your administration. 7. The most in California history under one governor. The state auditor, not a Republican, not a Trump appointee, your state's own auditor, has flagged your government as the most at-risk administration in the history of the state. He set the auditor's report beside the EDD.FAR Times UD analysis, the French Laundry photograph, the Panera Gate legislation, and the Williamson indictment summary. 6 documents on the desk, a governorship told in paper. Governor, I want to tell you about a woman I met. Not in California. She left California. She lives in Texas now. Her name is Maria. I'm not going to use her last name. She ran a nail salon in Fresno. 23 employees. During your lockdowns, she had to close. She applied for unemployment for her and for her employees. The EDD website crashed. She called the phone number, busy. She called again, busy. She called every day for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Governor. While your EDD was processing Scott Peterson's claim, Maria from Fresno couldn't get anyone to answer the phone. She lost the salon. 23 people lost their jobs. She moved to Texas. She told me California didn't work for people like me anymore. She started over in Houston. New salon, new state, new beginning. Because the state you run, the 5th largest economy on earth, couldn't answer a phone call from a woman who'd been paying taxes for 19 years. Newsom's composure, The composure that had survived the French Laundry, survived the recall, survived the Williamson indictment, survived 30 years of California politics, was still present. But the composure was no longer a feature. It was a liability. Because composure in the face of a woman losing her salon while D-Times row inmates collect unemployment reads not as strength, but as distance. The composure said, "I am above this," and the room had decided that above this was the problem. Governor, you want to be president. You've been running for president since the day you were born. Everybody knows it, you know it, I know it, your hair knows it. Laughter, brief, then silence. Because Trump's face changed. The showman left entirely, and what remained was the executive, the man behind the desk, the voice of a president addressing a governor who wants his job. But I have a question, a very simple question. He looked at Newsom with the look of a man who has run things, businesses, organizations, a country, and who recognizes in the person across from him someone who has run things into the ground while looking good doing it. You lost $31 billion in unemployment, FR times UD, the largest in American history. Newsom's breathing changed. The composed breathing, the modulated podcast host breathing that had been his respiratory signature since the hearing began, shortened, not visibly, not audibly, but present in the micro-elevation of his shoulders at the top of each inhale. Your chief of staff is under federal indictment. She bought a $15,000 Chanel bag with other people's money. The shoulders elevated further, a millimeter, another millimeter, the incremental rise of a body that is preparing for impact and is running out of room to prepare. Because the impacts have been coming for 40 minutes, and the body's reserves of preparation are not infinite. You spent $24 billion on homelessness, and can account for the results. Homeless population went up. You promised 3.5 million homes and built 640,000. You called it a stretch goal. 7 of your agencies are high risk. Your donor got a minimum wage exemption. You called it sausage making. And you ate at the French Laundry indoor, 12 guests, no masks, $350 per person, while telling 40 million people they couldn't eat with them. He leaned forward, not aggressively, presidentially. Governor, you can't run California. 4 words, 4 syllables per word, 16 syllables that contain the entire hearing. Why should America trust you to run the country? 6 seconds. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 seconds of silence from the most polished governor in America. The silence was different from every silence in the series. Omar's silence had been combative, the silence of a woman who wanted to scream but couldn't. AOC's silence had been the silence of a woman looking for a camera. Clinton's silence had been the silence of a system recalculating. Newsom's silence was the silence of a brand dying. The polish, the hair, the suit, the voice, the modulated California confidence, the 30 years of learning how to be the most composed person in any room was still there. Every element of the brand was intact, but the brand was empty. It was a suit with no one inside it. The polish had nothing left to polish. Newsom's face held. Of course it held. He was Gavin Newsom. His face had been holding since the recall. His face had been holding since the French Laundry. His face was designed to hold. But holding is not answering. And the question, why should America trust you to run the country, was not a question that holding could answer. It was a question that required a list of things built, things delivered, things accomplished, and the list, the real list, the one that started with $31 billion lost and ended with 640,000 homes instead of 3.5 million, was the wrong list. Because from where I'm standing, and I'm standing at a podium in Washington looking at the governor of a state that lost more money to FR times UD than the entire GDP of Iceland, the answer is they shouldn't. He closed the folder, gold tab. Thank you. Newsom responded. His response was 2 minutes and 41 seconds. It was the most polished response in the series, because Newsom was the most polished person in the series. He mentioned the 5th largest economy. He mentioned 40 million people. He mentioned technology, agriculture, entertainment, renewable energy. He mentioned the climate crisis, He mentioned that California's GDP had grown under his leadership. He mentioned that the EDD times UD was a national problem exacerbated by Trump's own Labor Department. He mentioned that homelessness was a national crisis. He mentioned that housing costs were driven by federal interest rate policy, not state governance. It was comprehensive, articulate, and structurally sound. Every point had a counterpoint, every accusation had a reframe. It was the response of a man who had been preparing for a debate with Donald Trump for 7 years and had finally gotten one. It addressed nothing. Not the $31 billion, not the specific mechanism by which Julie Su waived far times UD checks, not Scott Peterson, not Nuke Bizzle, not the French Laundry photograph showing indoor dining while his office claimed outdoor, not Panera Gate, not Greg Flynn, not the $164,800, not the Napa Resort, not Dana Williamson, not the Chanel bag, not the chartered jet, not the $170,000 birthday trip to Mexico, not the 3.5 million homes promised versus 640,000 built, not the 7 high-risk agencies, not the question. The response was a governor's response. It was designed for a press conference. It was designed for a debate stage. It was not designed for a room where a president had just read 6 documents and asked a question that required a list of accomplishments, and the list didn't exist. Trump did not react. He had closed the folder. He sat at the podium with the stillness of a man who has said everything and is now watching the other person say nothing while appearing to say everything. It was, in its own way, the most Trump thing he had done all day. Not the reading, not the numbers, not the jokes, but the final silence. The silence of a man who knows that the performance is over and the audience has already decided. The first clip to break was Scott Peterson. Trump reading the name of a death row inmate who received unemployment benefits from Newsom's EDD. The clip was 8 seconds long. It was shared 31 million times in the first 24 hours. The clip did not need context. The name was the context. Scott Peterson, convicted of mistreating his pregnant wife Lackey and their unborn son, collected unemployment benefits from the state of California while on D times death row. The name was the argument. The second clip was Nuke Bizzle. Trump describing a rapper who made a music video bragging about scamming California's unemployment system, followed by the room's laughter. This clip traveled through the particular ecosystem of people who process political information as entertainment, which is, by 2026, most people. The clip was funny. The fact that it was also a description of $31 billion in fraud made it funnier. The comedy and the sermonality were inseparable, and the inseparability was the point. The third clip was the Chanel bag. Trump reading Dana Williamson's indictment line by line, ending with, "You missed more than her big heart. You missed her big expense reports." This clip became the shorthand for the hearing, in the same way that "Who's the liar?" became the shorthand for the Omar hearing. It was the line that editorial boards quoted, that late-night hosts used, that opposition researchers filed. The fourth clip, the one that would end Newsom's 2028 frontrunner status, was "You can't run California." 12 seconds of silence after 6 words. The clip required no commentary. 6 words and 12 seconds. The 6 words were the argument, the 12 seconds were the verdict. The political consequences were immediate, structural, and for the first time in the series, they altered the trajectory of a presidential election that had not yet begun. The Department of Justice, under AG Kash Patel, formally opened a federal fraud investigation into California's administration of pandemic-era unemployment programs. The investigation was not limited to the EDD. It encompassed all federal program disbursements administered by California state agencies during the period 2020 to 2023, including Medi-Cal, CalFresh, and housing assistance programs. Grand jury subpoenas were issued to current and former EDD leadership, including former Labor Secretary Julie Su. The investigation was the largest federal fraud inquiry into a single state since Reconstruction. Dana Williamson's legal team entered preliminary cooperation discussions with the DOJ. The cooperation was not confirmed publicly. It was reported by Politico based on sources familiar with the discussions, but the direction was unmistakable. Williamson's legal exposure, $225,000 in fraud, $1.7 million in false expenses, pandemic relief fraud, was significant enough that cooperation, which in federal investigations means providing information about others in exchange for leniency, was the rational strategy. The others whose information Williamson might provide were, by proximity and by logic, the people in the office she had managed, the governor's office. Newsom's 2028 primary polling collapsed, not gradually, structurally. In the 30 days following the hearing, his position in Democratic primary surveys dropped from first, 27%, to third, 16%, behind Gretchen Whitmer, 23%, and Josh Shapiro, 19%. The drop was not on favorability, which remained stable among Democratic base voters. It was on the specific metric of competence to serve as president, the metric that separates a candidate people like from a candidate people trust. You can't run California had become the six-word test that every voter applied, consciously or not, to the question of whether Gavin Newsom should be given a larger job. The test had one answer, and the answer was in the polling. Every 2028 Democratic rival deployed the line within a week. Not in public statements, that would be gauche, but in private donor calls, in early state conversations, in the particular vocabulary of pre-campaign positioning where candidates do not attack each other directly, but instead raise questions that their donors and organizers understand as attacks. Whitmer's team circulated a memo titled Governance versus Performance that never mentioned Newsom by name but included the phrase, "Voters want a governor who can run a state before they want a president who can run a country." Shapiro SPAC ran digital ads in Pennsylvania, featuring the $31 billion number alongside Pennsylvania's comparatively low FR times UD rate, and in a podcast interview said, "The American people deserve a president who has demonstrated the ability to actually manage, the institutions they oversee." None of them said, "You can't run California." They didn't need to. Trump had said it for them. California's business exodus, which had been a slow migration for years, accelerated into a visible flight. Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and Nevada, economic development agencies incorporated hearing footage into relocation marketing materials within 2 weeks. A Texas campaign featured the $31 billion number alongside the tagline, "In Texas, we keep track of the money." The campaign was crude. It was also effective. 3 tech companies, mid-size, between 200 and 500 employees, announced relocation plans in the month following the hearing, citing regulatory uncertainty and questions about state fiscal management. Newsom gave a post-hearing press conference. It was polished. It was comprehensive. It mentioned the 5th largest economy, 40 million people, technology, agriculture. It was the same response he had given in the hearing, delivered standing up instead of sitting down, with a podium instead of a table. The press conference was shared 4,000 times. The Scott Peterson clip had been shared 31 million times. The ratio, 4,000 to 31 million, was the ratio of polish to impact, of performance to evidence, of the brand Newsom had built to the record Trump had read. Trump posted one line on Truth Social the morning after Newsom lost $31 billion and wants to run the country. "I've built buildings worth more than his state can count." Big difference. It was the only post about the hearing he made. The restraint, by Trump standards, was the loudest thing he did. In Madisonville, Louisiana, Gerald Thibodeau stood behind the counter of the bait shop. The television was on, the hearing replay was running. A customer, not the Tuesday regular, a different one, a woman who came in Saturdays for crawfish bait, stood at the counter watching. "That the governor of California?" she asked. "That's him. He lost $31 billion?" "That's what the man said." She shook her head. $31 billion. "I can't even picture that." Gerald bagged her crawfish bait, counted by feel. Boudreaux would say, "If you lose $31 billion, you don't get to manage anything bigger than a lemonade stand. And even then, somebody should count the lemons." She paid, left. The bell rang. Gerald turned back to the television. Trump was closing the folder, gold tab, standing at the podium. You can run California. Gerald wiped the counter, rearranged the spinners. $31 billion, he said to the empty shop. That's not a scandal, that's a country. In Middletown, Ohio, Crystal Atkins sat in the break room of the Brighter Days Recovery Center. The television was on. Donna was there. The coffee was cold. It was always cold by the time the hearings ended. 8 stories. Crystal said she didn't count. She didn't list. She had been listing for 7 hearings. Omar, AOC, Clinton, each one categorized, each one analyzed, each one filed in the taxonomy of failure she had been building since the first hearing. Tonight, she was tired of listing. Tonight, the taxonomy was complete. You know what all 8 stories are really about? She said. What? Trust. That's all. Just trust. We give people jobs. We give them titles. We give them offices and staff and budgets and our taxes. And we trust them to do the job. And every one of these people, every single one, took the trust and used it for something else. Omar used it to protect FR Times UD in her district. AOC used it to build a brand. Clinton used it to build a fortune. Newsom used it to, God, where do you start with Newsom? He lost $31 billion, ate at the French Laundry, carved out a minimum wage exemption for his donor, and his chief of staff is under indictment for buying a Chanel bag with campaign money. Donna sat her sandwich down. That's a lot of stories. 8 stories. Crystal leaned back in her chair. 8 people. 8 different kinds of failure. But you know what? They're not really different. They just look different because the details are different. Omar's details are FAR Times UD and phantom meals. AOC's details are FEC filings and psychiatrists. Clinton's details are emails and foundations. Newsom's details are billions and French restaurants. Different details, same thing underneath. What thing? The distance. Same thing I've been saying since the Kennedy hearing. The distance between who they say they are and who they actually are. Omar says she represents her community, but she fights the investigation into FR Times UD that hurt her community. AOC says she fights for the little guy, but she pays a psychiatrist $19,000 with the little guy's $16. Clinton says she's been in public service for 30 years, but the service produced $120 million for her and $412 for Mama's shoebox. And Newsom says he runs the 5th largest economy on earth, but he can run an unemployment office without losing $31 billion to Scott Peterson and a rapper named Nuke Bizzle. She looked at the screen. Newsom's 12 seconds of silence. The polished face holding, the brand dying inside the suit. But the silence. The silence is what gets me every time. 8 stories, 8 silences, and the silence is always the same. It's the silence of a person who has been asked a simple question. What did you do with what we gave you? And can't answer. Not because they don't have words, they all have words. They have the best words, polished words, focus-grouped words, words that sound like answers without being answers. They can't answer because the answer is, I used it for myself. She paused longer than usual, looked at her hands, the hands that had rinsed cups for 9 years in the same break room after watching the same people try to survive. You know what the difference is between the people in this break room and the people on that screen? We show up? That's it. That's the whole difference. Rosa shows up at the nail salon. Abdi shows up at the convenience store. Gerald shows up at the bait shop. I show up here. We don't have $31 billion. We don't have foundations. We don't have French Laundry reservations. We just show up. We answer the phone. We open the door. We flip the sign from closed to welcome. And we do it tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. And the people on that screen, they stopped showing up a long time ago. They show up on camera. They show up at galas. They show up at Munich. But they stopped showing up where it matters. Where the phones ring, where the casework sits, where the meatloaf is on Wednesdays, where the EDD line is 3 weeks long and nobody answers. She rinsed her cup, hot water, no soap, upside down on the rack. The ritual, the last ritual. 8 cups, 8 rinses, 8 stories, 8 people, 1 question, what did you do with what we gave you? And the answer is always the same. She walked back to the group room. 8 people trying to stay alive, waiting for her to help them do it. Real people with real problems who didn't have polished words or press conferences or gold tabs on their folders. They just had Crystal. And Crystal showed up every day, answered the phone, did the work, rinsed the cup. That's the difference. The television played on in the empty break room. Trump at the podium. The folder closed. The gold tab catching the light. You can't run California. Why should America trust you to run the country? 12 seconds. The screen cut to commercial. If you made it this far, you just watched the 2028 Democratic frontrunner sit in silence for 12 seconds after a president asked him 6 words, "You can't run California." And in those 12 seconds, a presidential campaign that had been building for 30 years, the hair, the suit, the podcast voice, the anti-Trump brand, the 5th largest economy talking point, met the one thing polish cannot survive. A list of numbers that polish cannot explain. Smash that like button if Donald Trump reminded you that you can tea-talk your way out of $31 billion. Subscribe for more stories where folders beat polish and numbers beat charm. Share this with everyone who has ever watched a governor describe the 5th largest economy on earth and wondered why that economy keeps losing track of its money. Comment below, what was your moment? Scott Peterson on D Times Athro, Nuke Bizzle's music video, the French Laundry photograph, the $15,000 Chanel bag? You missed her big expense reports? The 3.5 million homes that became 640,000? Or the 12 seconds of silence after you can run California? Turn on notifications because the DOJ investigation has begun. The grand jury subpoenas are out. The chief of staff is cooperating. The polling has collapsed. The 2028 rivals are circling. And somewhere in Sacramento, the most polished governor in America is sitting in an office that just became a lot smaller. He came with a speech about the 5th largest economy. Trump came with a folder about the largest FR times UD. He said, invasive species. Trump said, you can't run California. One of those lines will be forgotten by Friday. The other will be on every debate stage for the next 2 years. $31 billion. Scott Peterson, Nuke Bizzle, the French Laundry, 15 Chanel bag, 640 homes, 7 high-risk agencies, 12 seconds of silence. That's not a governorship, that's an audit. God bless the Californians who were on hold with EDD while Scott Peterson was cashing checks. God bless the waitresses and bus drivers who lost their jobs in lockdowns and couldn't reach anyone at the unemployment office. God bless the fast food workers who got $20 an hour while their boss's competitor's workers didn't because the competitor knew the governor. God bless every family who canceled Thanksgiving because their governor told them to and then watched him eat at the French Laundry. God bless everyone who trusted a polished man with a big job and learned the hard way that polish is not performance. You can run California, Governor, and California is the answer. God bless.